We all have a natural tendency to follow others, to look at what people around us are doing and do the same thing. Whether in small decisions like our fashion choices or big ones like career or education or similar. As soon as we are in doubt, one of the very first options is to see what others are doing. And this isn't actually too bad of an idea. We often hear people say don't follow others and stay true to your own colors and find your own path to go, etc. But if it weren't a good idea, following others would not have become one of our default behaviors. Sometimes these little short sentiments help us. Sometimes we are in the face of a decision to make and these types of sentences present themselves as a much needed sign to us. We take so much meaning and motivation out of them and do something in our lives. But generally, if following others were useless and wrong, we wouldn't feel like doing it so strongly. In fact, it's because of its repeated value throughout time that it's become one of our default behaviors. Let me give some examples. I don't have the time or the energy to make all the best decisions myself all the time. Oftentimes, the exact decisions that other people have made before me works just fine in my life as well. Why waste my time? And we face these decisions all the time. Take buying a book as a simple decision. I want to buy a book about diet and there are 10 options in front of me. I can't really go research the history of all the authors to see which one's style matches me the best. I can't read reviews of all these books either. I just buy the one that sold the most and this is a really good decision. The author of the book agrees as well, so they only write 1 million copies sold. They don't bother explaining why it's a good book. They just say other people think it's a good book and I follow them. Yes, of course I could have found a book that was better for me in some aspects had I actually researched and examined them all, but my decision making took only 5 minutes now. Researching them all would have been 5 business days. So although this book is most likely not the best diet book in the world for me, following this decision is a better choice overall. Another benefit is that sometimes following other people automatically makes me part of their group, and being in the group brings me protection. Sometimes this is physical protection and sometimes non-physical. I was watching a show once where they had some cameras inside some jail to record what happens in there as they send new people in. Something that would happen all the time was that each race would only hang out with their own people. White guys with white guys, black guys with black guys, and the same with the rest. And every new person sent in followed the same rules with no problems and sat at their own race's table. Until one day some white guy who had just come in decided to be appropriate and didn't want to be racist and decided to be with both groups. He would hang out with the white guys, for example, but would sit at the black folks' table for lunch. And every time some of his white friends warned him about this, he would defend himself saying he doesn't want to be involved in these race separations and that he's always been with black people since his childhood and it's not okay to be like that and other similar arguments. As you can guess, he almost got himself killed before they transferred him to another jail. You and I too will do the same thing and follow the same groups once in that environment, regardless of how immoral we believe it is and how frequently we used to tweet against racism before. Because this will make me part of that group and being in the group brings me protection here. Now you might say, well yeah, but this is jail, it's different. But even in our everyday lives, we follow people just to be in their group. Imagine you are the manager of a department in some organization. The financial situation of the whole country and your organization alike is not looking good and everyone's expecting a crisis. You notice that all the other departments in the organization are cutting some of their employees' benefits. They used to provide lunch for everyone, but they don't anymore. They used to reimburse some commute expenses, but they don't anymore. Now that no one knows whether this decision will turn out to be a good one in future, if you simply follow the other managers and it turns out to be a bad one, no one can reprimand you because you are part of a larger group, the group of all department managers in this organization who have all made the same decision. If there are any investigations to happen, they should be focused on what was going on with the entire organization that all of its managers came to the same wrong decision. There must have been something. And on the flip side, if you don't follow the other managers and it turns out to be a good decision later on, you will be reprimanded very easily as the only manager who couldn't see this coming. Hence, if I just follow what everyone else is doing, I'll be safe. Regardless of what happens to the company, no one can blame me. The group that I'm joining this way will bring me non-physical protection, because it helps me not to stand out and to become one of many. However, despite all of the benefits that following others has had for us, which have made this behavior an internal feeling, there is another problem that our brains have never seen, never thought about, and never took account of while creating this feeling because it never existed. Let's define a number called the unrelatability number. The unrelatability number means how many years should I go forward so the life of that time would not be understandable for me and would have few things to relate to. For example, about 300 years ago, when the first humans who were like us lived, The unrelatability number was about 150,000 years. That means although many changes happened in that time, they weren't significant enough to constitute an unrelatable life. But if they traveled 150,000 years forward and saw people talking to each other, then that would be a completely different life. I've never seen people talking to each other. I don't even know what talking is. The unrelatability number has been getting smaller and smaller throughout history. It was about 150,000 years for those first men, but it was only about 30,000 years for the folks who lived 40,000 years ago. They only needed to travel 30,000 years forward to witness an unrelatable life, one in which people were mostly busy with farming. They would plant stuff in the soil and make food out of it. They would tame animals for their service or sometimes feed them to get food from them later. As we go forward, the unrelatability number keeps getting smaller. So for the same farmer men, it was only 8,000 years. After 8,000 years, they would see people exchanging some weird round metal objects for food and services. They would see some people saying something, then some other people carving stuff out on a stone in a way that whoever sees that stone would know exactly what they said. They would see some people talking about something called God and doing things for it. And overall, that life would have very few things in common with what they knew as life. It would seem more like an imaginary story someone came up with. Now, something is very obvious. Even if I could travel 10,000 years forward in time and see those people's lives and see how better and more efficient and more comfortable it is, I can't do what they do in my life, even though my logic and reason are begging me to. The group who still can't talk can't adopt the same hunting strategies of those who can. It would have been great if they could do the same things, but their strategies are so based on quick communication. Or the group who could talk would have loved to adopt a farming lifestyle, to put lots of cows and sheep in a big land and plant stuff in another and feed off of those. But since they have neither domesticated the dog to help them protect their cattle, nor made the tools to do that job, doing so would only mean having prepared a good supply of daily food for all the wolves and lions around. Hence, even if people after my unrelatability time are doing stuff that I would like to do as well, I probably can't. That's why it's called the unrelatability number. Now, another attribute of this unrelatability number throughout time was that it was always greater than the human lifespan. That means if you ever put someone in a box on a random day and kept them there until their last day when you would allow them to come out and have one last look at their city, they would never be so shocked to think they have been transferred to another timeline. Sure, their people would have solved some problems and invented some cool stuff, but they would probably go, you finally found a way to do this, you clever bastards, good job. Not, what is happening here? What even is this place? You would have needed to go forward some multiple of their lifespan for that incomprehensible world. Therefore, unrelatability has never been a problem for our brains. You would never even see someone outside your unrelatability time. The hunters never saw the farmers to even consider doing the same things as them. And the farmers never saw the hunters either to ask themselves, is there a reason they are doing something different? And this is the issue I mentioned our brains have never had to deal with because it never existed. And it was like that until about 300 years ago. As we said, the unrelatability number keeps getting smaller, and it's probably been about 300 years now that for the first time, it's actually gotten smaller than the human lifespan. Nowadays, if you go in a box and come out on your last day, you would probably not even understand what's happening around you. Allow me to demonstrate. Let's say the human lifespan is 80 years and let's compare the last 3 80-year spans. We call the current 80-year span the third generation, the one before that the second generation, and the one before that the first generation. If someone from the second generation met someone from the first generation and wanted to tell them about their day, they could have told them, so yeah, Jennifer called me last night and said she was feeling kinda down, so I drove to her place and picked her up. Then we got on an airplane and went to a beach. I recorded these pelicans while we were there. Do you want to see the video? It's quite cool. And the only thing that the first generation person would understand from that story would be that they know someone called Jennifer. Nothing else from that one day in his life would be understandable. And then someone from the third generation could go to that second generation dude and tell him, hey, so I saw your pelican video, it was cool, but it was black and white. Here, I fixed it for you. I used some AI, so now it's fully colored, and I also made the pelican sing Damien Rice while holding a glass of wine, just to make it more fun. I also found another video on the internet. Seems like their pelicans are prettier. Maps said its location is only 2 kilometers away, so I quickly bought a 4K camera online. It'll be here in a couple of hours. Do you want to get an Uber when it's here and go check it out? Not only have we never had such unrelatability between two generations, but presently everything is different within one generation as well, because the unrelatability number is now smaller than the human lifespan. You could even say the unit of unrelatability isn't time anymore, it's location. Two groups of people can now be alive at the same time but have completely unrelated lives. Let's consider Isaac and Amy. Isaac keeps all of his important dates and plans in his mind. Amy uses a digital calendar and stores everything there. Isaac doesn't have air conditioning in either his car or at work. Amy does. Isaac has to cook lunch for himself every day and take it to work. Amy works somewhere that provides lunch for all employees. Isaac isn't really used to using Google and looking stuff up. He's comfortable with the internet and has many apps on his phone, but takes most of his information from social media. Even if he wanted to look things up and find answers to his questions, he isn't from an English-speaking country and isn't very comfortable with the language. And unfortunately for him, most of the world's information is in English and he doesn't find much when he tries it in his first language. But Amy has learned from a very young age not to believe everything she hears, and as soon as you tell her something, she whips out her phone to double check it. And luckily for her, she's been speaking English her whole life and can consume most of the information in the world. So as soon as she has a problem at work, it takes her only a few minutes to find a solution for it on the internet and never gets stuck. Isaac and Amy live at the same time, but their lives are nothing like each other. To see such differences, you needed to travel 1,000 years in time previously. Now you can travel 1,000 meters in location and you'll see it just as significantly. Isaac boils and stews 8 hours every day at work, and while wiping the sweat off of his face, he is also constantly trying to remember all of his important dates, like when he was getting coffee with his friend, whether it's been 6 months since his last dentist appointment yet, where else he should go today, and so on. He also has daily work problems that he can't solve unless some other colleague comes to rescue him, because he can't use the information he needs even if it's already produced and placed on the internet. Amy doesn't have any of these problems. If they both had 100 units of energy every day to make progress in their lives, Isaac has already lost 30 of it while Amy is ready with all her 100. Now, although there is probably some Isaac and some Amy somewhere in the world, exactly how we describe them as our story examples, it's not at all that there is some default majority in which Isaacs or Amys are exceptions. It's not that there are only two groups either, the groups of all Isaacs who don't use these modern tools and the group of all Amys who do. The truth is that there are so many tools nowadays with as many combinations and settings of using them as there are people, which means they each have a different life from everyone else and can do many things that no one else around them can. In other words, people around them might very well have the same unrelatable life to them that the hunter and the farmer had. The tools we talk about include knowledge as well. Everyone has some information not known to everyone else. Each of us knows how to do certain things that other people around us have no idea about. Because just like technology that's growing faster than us, science too is advancing just as quickly. There is no one anymore presently who knows about all fields of science or even understands the basics of them in the way that polymaths like Aristotle or Al-Biruni did. Everyone just holds a tiny bit of all the available information in the world and tries to achieve the best they can with it. This tiny bit of information combined with the tiny bit of tools that each person has makes everyone have a unique life, unrelatable to most other people. And this difference doesn't mean that with every pair of people, one of them can do everything the other one can and just be better and one step ahead all the time. The example we gave of Isaac and Amy was somewhat like that, but only because I described the parts of Amy's life that were better than Isaac's. Isaac has more information and tools in other areas that give him a different type of advantage. Isaac has read a dozen of psychology and parenting books and is quite knowledgeable there. Amy hasn't read any and doesn't know much. So most of her parenting is just an imitation of what she has seen from her own parents with a side of random intuitions. Isaac probably has fewer concerns about his kids, but Amy is constantly stressed about her kids, and even when she is not physically there, she is mentally occupied while some of her problems with these kids are never solved and just keep on getting worse every day. Isaac has done a couple of digital safety courses before, so he knows pretty confidently which websites are to be trusted with his information and which ones aren't, which online shops can be trusted with online payments and which ones can't, which emails are scams and which ones aren't. Amy doesn't work in a related field and isn't very confident about these details. Unfortunately, she's also been scammed a couple of times, so she just prefers to avoid them altogether. The point is, the lives of any two random people aren't similar enough in the current time so you could take any decision from one and take it to the other and expect it to work. We have created a lot of little parallel lives and each of us is living in one. at the same time and close proximity, but separate from each other. These parallel lives and their unrelatability is one of those things that our brains have never experienced before, and thus our intuitions don't have any understanding of it. From the perspective of my feelings and intuitions, it doesn't mean anything that someone would be right in front of me but would be living an entirely different life. Because it's always been a single life at any time with one circle of people in it that maybe occasionally had exceptional Isaacs and Amys. Or even if there were some lives different to mine, I wouldn't know about them. Sure, let's say there is a large group of people living their lives with different tools and knowledge and in different ways in some other continent. How would I hear about them? All of these advanced tools of quick mass communication were also made only in the last 2 to 3 generations. It's only now that we can hear about people whose lives have nothing to do with us. Therefore, I keep seeing the world with all of its new changes with the same old intuition my brain is used to. I hear about what some more successful people have done and want to try doing the same things. Or I read one of those how to become successful books and decide to try the author's suggestions. Either way, it doesn't work and I fail. Then I feel weak and insufficient because for a moment my brain tells me, looks like we are an exception to these people around us. A weaker exception who can't do the things they do. Or on the flip side, sometimes I decide to do something that's different to everyone else. Everyone else is studying that type of course, I decide to study something else. Everyone's pursuing this type of career, I decide to do something else. Everyone's putting their kids in school 9 to 3, I decide to do something else. It's a decision I have made through logical reasoning, but I doubt myself a million times because my brain thinks I'm making myself an exception, an outlier, and it worries me that that might ruin my life. While in reality, there is no main circle of people of which I'd be an exception. It's just a lot of parallel lives. Many of us may have the same goals in our parallel lives, but not being able to take the same steps as someone else doesn't mean I won't get to the same goal. It just means I have to find my own parallel path in our parallel lives for the same goal. Similarly, if I have decided to follow a path that's different to others, it doesn't mean it will necessarily lead to a different goal either. Having the same goals is possible, taking the exact same steps might not be. And it's still not too bad when we at least try to follow someone whose life isn't too different to ours. But sometimes we suddenly decide, from now on, I'm gonna work 80 hours per week because that's what Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and whoever else is doing. Little do we know, our dear friend Mr. Musk probably doesn't do a single chore in his life. He doesn't do grocery shopping, doesn't cook, doesn't do his own laundry, doesn't wait in the doctor's clinic for an hour. And probably has a dozen people doing lots of his tasks for him. And yes, following all of that, he also works 80 hours per week. The only common element of our lives is that we probably both wipe ourselves in the toilet, and I'm not even super sure on that one. The point is, this is where the conflict between an intuition that says follow people and a reasoning that says don't comes from and causes fear and anxiety. Maybe in another 10,000 years the human brain will get used to seeing different lives parallel to its own and this conflict would go away. But for now, the conflict is here for us to deal with. There are also some traps that sometimes make it harder for our brains to comprehend these parallel lives. One of these traps is how we are always hearing about the peaks of everyone else's lives. Every day we wake up and hear a group of researchers have discovered something new, a group of engineers have invented something new, a group of astronomers have found some new stars or whatever they do nowadays, a group of people have set some new record in something, and always only the peaks. This sometimes tickles the feeling of these successful people are moving forward every day, doing cool new things. I'm the only one stuck with my old everyday tedious tasks because I can't do what they do. I have tried before, there is no hope. Part of this comes from what the news has to tell us from those achievements every day. Another part is what people directly share with us on social media about the peaks of their lives every day. This also relates to the vicious cycle we talked about in our previous video about why we humiliate others. Another trap we often fall into is something I call, I guess, but the scientific community calls it information cascades. Remember the story of buying a book from earlier? I bought the book that had sold 1 million copies just because 1 million people had chosen it. Now when the next person comes and sees 1,000,001 people have bought this book, they would want to buy it too, but in reality, I for one shouldn't be part of their statistics. Because I hadn't made up my own mind, I just followed the people before me. So if they are gonna assume it must be a good book when so many people have bought it, they should limit that thought to the original 1 million. But the reality is the majority of those 1 million people were in the same boat. We all saw a book that had sold to so many people and all just said, I guess. And now the number of those who said, I guess, before buying it is more than those who had actually put thought into it. Now this isn't normally a problem in buying books, but let's say a few of my friends and I go to a mall and want to buy some clothes. There are 2 shops and we choose one randomly. The next person comes and sees one of these shops is empty, the other one has a few people in it. It's more likely they would come to our shop. Same with the next person and the one after that until there are 15 people in this shop, 2 in the other. And even then, if someone else sees this shop is too crowded and goes into the other one, they'd still probably think, alright, maybe I should come back later and check out this other shop too. There are so many people there, it must be really good quality. Sometimes this cascade automatically stops, usually in long-term things where lots of options are available. Like buying a book. It's unlikely you would buy a book that 1 million people have bought and it actually turns out an unworthy one. But sometimes the cascade doesn't stop, and this is something to consider when making life decisions. When and in what areas is everyone doing the same thing in their parallel lives just because they're all saying, I guess if everyone else is doing it? And the last trap is a weird feature of our brains called the curse of knowledge. And in this context, this curse applies to tools and technologies too. The idea is that when we learn something new or a new tool is added to our life, all of our brain wirings change in a short amount of time so that it feels like we have always had those tools and information. Just another regular thing. It's like when someone tells you a puzzle and you can't figure out the answer at all, but as soon as they tell you what it is, it feels so obvious that then you can't believe it when you tell someone else the puzzle and they don't get the answer immediately. You're just like, it's so easy, how do you not see it? In an experiment 40 years ago, they asked a lot of people some trivia questions like how tall is that mountain or when did that war happen, etc, etc. After they answered each question, they asked them, now predict what percentage of the other participants would know the answer. Those who knew the correct answer for a question overestimated what portion of all participants would know it too, because in their minds they just think, yeah, that's common knowledge, everyone knows that. Or in another study, they give all financial reports of some 10 years of a company to a group of students. They ask half of them to predict what their revenue would be the year after. For the other half, they tell them what their revenue actually is after this 10-year period, and then they ask them, predict what the other group is gonna predict for the revenue. The question basically means just ignore this information we gave you about the correct answer and come up with a prediction according to the rest of the data. So you'd expect the 2 groups would have similar averages, but they didn't. The average answers of the group who knew the answer was much closer to the actual answer than the other group. Because it's really hard to see the problem from someone's perspective who doesn't have your information. Even when we try, there are still lots of assumptions that we take for granted and assume everyone knows them. What's more interesting is to spice things up, in another experiment they teach the groups about this effect so everyone would be trained. Then they also offer them money if they can actually put the information aside and just solve the problem like how someone else would, and still the majority can't do it. The point is we assume all the knowledge and the tools we have are common and everyone has them. This makes us think that what we can do is a subset of what others can do, even when we know our lives are all parallel. We automatically assume everything we have is common and everyone has them, but here there are so many things that obviously everyone else has and I don't. Therefore, my abilities must be a subset of theirs. Remember the story we talked about earlier about how that department manager just followed other managers so no one could reprimand him? There have been multiple studies, especially regarding the 2008 financial crisis, trying to understand why so many investors and managers who had private information that others didn't have still made the same decisions as everyone else and made choices that no one with their information should have made. This wasn't the only reason. One of the reasons was the same thing we explained, that it's hard for the brain to understand which parts of its knowledge is common and which parts are really unique, and if others are making a decision, they don't necessarily have my unique information. I just ignored my advantage in this competition. In conclusion, all of this was to say we are all living different parallel lives. Although we are all alive at the same time, many lives have nothing to do with us and are completely outside our relatability zone. This doesn't mean we should never follow others. We gave examples of how that could be useful. It also doesn't mean we can always follow others. It's just a new lens for the next time you have a life decision to make, to use as you will. To summarize the main 2 points of this new lens, one was that not every group of people are necessarily followable as much as their lives look reasonable and appealing to us. And 2, if we are doing something completely different to others in some aspect of our lives, that doesn't necessarily mean we are making a mistake either. Maybe we have finally realized we have tools that others don't. And these 2 points don't match our brain's default intuitions because it's never been like this before. And a side point here would be it's probably worthwhile to pick up new tools and learn new things when they are relevant to our lives. Today we can easily spend 6 months and learn about some new tools that would significantly improve our lives' quality, an impact that humans previously would have needed to travel in time to achieve. All of that said, this new lens never claims that following others is a bad idea or anything like that. Sometimes the group protection might be necessary, or we may just come to a rational decision that following is objectively a better choice. Or maybe even we find a group of people whose lives aren't unrelatable to us and we can easily follow them. That's great. But I hope when you do decide to follow some group of people, you don't feel insufficient if you try and you fail. And also when you realize you have capabilities that give you an advantage and you know that if you follow the group that advantage will be gone but you're having doubts, I hope you can put this new lens in front of those doubts.